Citizen Planning Trainer Collaborative training sessions to identify procedures and policies, changes that the board may have considered. The planning board had two trainings recently in the last month, and as well as planning board members. There was people from the Zoning Board of Appeals, as well as people from the neighborhood committees. Aaron, is there anything particular you want to discuss on this, or is it just some of the things that were brought to our attention at the last two zonings, or?
There wasn't really anything in particular. I just wanted to give the board a chance to communicate to us any kind of changes in procedures that you might want to see out of those meetings. One I know that we're going to start putting into place right now is based on some of the discussion revolving around open meeting law and decision letters. You've all probably noticed that you haven't seen draft decision letters for quite some time. And that was one concern was emailing that and getting comments via email, which would violate open meeting law. So the way to deal with that is, and what we'll start doing is email out the draft to everybody in the planning board, and then we'll receive comments. If you can reply just directly to whoever sent it, whatever staff person sent it to you, so it's not a discussion. It's a one-to-one kind of communication, and we can incorporate that for a final draft for approval. That way you'll get a chance to review the decisions, make sure that you'll at least have a chance to review it. So that's one thing that we're going to put into place moving forward. But if there was any other, any comments or other ideas from those meetings, we're happy to, so we can implement
Just
that.
to follow up what Aaron was saying on that, so what happens was when he stopped sending out the draft comments, when he had communication in-house about it violating open meetings, he would send them to me as the chairperson, and I'd look them over, and I'd get them back to either Aaron or Joe. And then I'd look at my notes and see if basically everything was okay. If I had any changes, I'd go back to them directly because they were concerned with the open meeting. And at the first training, the gentleman indicated that, if we all communicated back and forth, then it's definitely a violation of the open meeting law. And Aaron didn't make the first training. He was ill that night, and so I spoke with him at length, probably a couple times since then, and indicated some of the stuff that brought up that night, and the materials that he gave us, which were very helpful to digest and read after listening to the training that night. And that's how he mentioned, you can do it that way, just keep the lines of communication open, especially now where we see more and more open meeting laws, especially last year when it came down, where we have to post it. And, I know a lot of small cities and towns are concerned where they're going to put it, where is it and all that, where is it accessible to the public on 24 hours before the matters. You have people putting like on a Sunday evening, meetings on Monday or Tuesday. So that gentleman, the one of the comments he said is, what Aaron was saying, if we communicate back to the planning staff and not amongst ourselves, they might not violate that open meeting law. So that, so hopefully they'll cure that. But for the time being, they would check with me to think if I had any concerns with it. They'd draft it up. I'd look at my notes from memory, and sometimes there'd be some changes. But most of the time, since they have it recorded pretty well, most of the things were done pretty well, as you've all seen in the past. And that's probably why you haven't seen them for a little while, but I was still getting. So,
Mr. Chairman, I had one thing from the last meeting and thought was interesting, and just to throw out there for discussion or consideration. As long as I can remember, in the public hearings, we've always had opened the public hearings for people to speak for or against. And what was brought up at the last meeting was the, rather than using that format and establishing more of a, adversarial for and against, is you open it up for public comment. And then many times residents will come before us and not really, and as you know, as chairman, not really want to speak for or against, but have some questions or concerns. And so you just, it's recommended going down the line, if there's a row, and just going down the row and have anyone come to the microphone, speak, give their name, and whether then, it would come out whether they're for the project or against it, or if they just have concerns and questions. I thought it was interesting. I think most of I think even at the city council, it's presented that way. But I just thought it was very, very interesting. And I know the ZBA, I think, does the same thing for and against. But again, I just thought it was interesting. Although I don't find the format that we currently use problematic per se, but I thought it was an interesting suggestion.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, that was actually news to me. I had understood that format was kind of a requirement of the public process, but apparently the portion of the public hearing where the public speaks doesn't have to be so
For or against?
so defined as for or against, and so it allows for a little bit more subtlety, I guess, and it allows or encourages comment, not even an opinion. Maybe someone's just concerned about a specific element of a project, rather than saying, well, I don't like it. So, I agree, it was interesting feedback that I was not aware of.
Yeah,
No,
Mr. Chair, on that point, I was at that training too, and that also surprised me that I also thought it was a requirement. I thought that people had to go on the record for, future analysis of the meeting as to whether they were for or against, but this gentleman obviously pointed out that that's not the case. In fact, he encouraged people not to set up the adversarial situation. In our meetings, a lot of people will get up and say, I'm not really for it, or I'm not really against it, I just have this comment. So we kind of do that anyway, but I certainly wouldn't be opposed to changing that. The one thing that I do think we ought to keep the way we do it, though, is that gentleman also said that people can get up and just ask questions. And I think it's okay for them to get up to ask questions, but I made a point of asking him if it's still up to the chairman to sort of dictate the format, and he agreed with that. And I like the way that you handle the public who attend public hearings asking questions, and that is really not to allow them to ask questions to the applicant directly, rather sort of collect them, and make sure we provide an answer. Because I think sometimes if we get into a situation where somebody for or against is questioning an applicant directly, like it's some type of interrogation, it can get out of hand. So I just wanted to make that point.
And I've seen, to follow up on that, they start talking to each other over there. We're out of the picture, but then like they're not even communicating with us.
Right.
So, and I've seen that over the years. What I try to do is you ask them to us, and what I've noticed from the response of all of us here, we all take pretty good notes, and one of us is going to ask that question. And that's why I'll say,
Right.
you can ask them all you want. We will get to that.
Yeah.
And if I don't pick it up, somebody else will, if we don't have it in the comments. And sometimes I don't always get in on time, but a lot of times when I ask Division Plan Development what their concerns are, what I'm trying to do is, if I think of it, is try to let them speak after the public does before it comes to us. Because then sometimes we can get some input from Aaron or other staff comments, like, is there anything further in your notes that you gave us that you want to add to? Because then sometimes it alleviates it. I like when the applicant comes forward and has staff comments and goes through them for us. Because they say, do you want me to comment on it? Sure, go through 1 through 12.
Right.
And then that saves us for asking those same questions. So, and then of course you have some other people come in, what staff comments? Well, I'm in favor of some of them, but not none of them, but I like when they address. Because then it get back to, I believe when we had the first training, and a lot of times as Joe has done on the motion is, which they said, memo dated this date is part of the record, we accept it. Remember how they mentioned that date? He said, you have to, and when you get into the conditional approvals, the guy says, responsibility still sits with the board, because I think you asked a question about when we refer things to DPD, where does it go? He says, well, it's still responsibility of the board, but if you say, I agree with comments stated by DPD this date, that's acceptable, or our city engineer, but, I think a lot of it come up about the landscaping. Wasn't that, Jerry? I think you had some of the questions on that, like, how do we make them do it, and then who holds the thing to it? And I think, I tried to do that a little bit on the Walgreens, like, bring it back, because there's so much of questions on what was going on, especially where we had 3 different parties looking at all the traffic. We had in-house, the applicant, and then the third party. So things like that. So I think if we think the memo thing hits it on the head a little bit, but that way, when we get discussion by them, they can comment it. But I like when the applicant does address them on those letters of comments, Some of them do a very good job on that part of it. But I mean, I have no problem on trying to do a comment thing, to the public, but like I say, I know the council does it, the ZBA's done it, we've been doing it, but.
Maybe we could just try.
Yeah, I mean, I have no problem,
do that. I think we just did it as historically, that's the
Right.
way it's always been
Yeah,
done.
I mean,
Some
since-
council does it or whatever, but I've been before boards in other communities, and they don't do it that way, just they open it up for comments. Does anybody wish to speak regarding this project? And you can draw your own conclusions as to whether they're for or against it or whatever. Yeah, that's right.
That wouldn't affect you in the
Well, you
minutes,
gotta
right?
make it
You just put
clear
comment?
that it's for and against.
Yeah, I think what we would do is just in the minutes, a very quick or a very short description of what they were concerned about, or, you know, if that was a positive with the project.
Because I think, on one and two projects I can think of particularly, everybody was in favor, but for this part. And then when it came down to against, no one spoke against, but a lot of them were happy with two-thirds of it, but not the other third. So you didn't see anybody speaking negative about the project, but they all spoke negatively about it. I'm happy about this, but I don't like this. If I have to accept it, I want it this way, but I really think it's too busy there. So now you're like, they're in favor, so you see nobody against it. So that could be like, well, no one spoke against it, what's the board, you know?
Sure.
So I think that would help clarify some of those issues. I think the project I'm thinking about is, you want to have a question of funeral parlor, you know, with this, you know, 'cause I like it, but,
Oh, the building,
yeah.
yeah.
You know, some of
Yeah,
the people,
yeah.
they mostly spoke in favor, but a lot of them had questions and said, I like this, but I don't like this part. So where do you put them in as for or against? But they'd lead off, I like this, but and then at the end, if we have to put it in. That's just one, I think of it because it was a recent one, but that was. But either way, I have no problem with that, whichever way I think the criteria is basically for the public hearing, yeah.
I had a couple of questions, and going through the materials you sent us, which I thought were very well put together, I liked reading them. There were a couple of things that I was just wondering that if we're following them completely, or if it's something we need to do. And one is the matter of the closing of the public hearing. You know, every now and then, you know, we will close a public hearing, but I don't think we do it in every case, and I don't know if it's an actual requirement, but I did see something in the materials that talks about conducting the hearing, and it says the public hearing ends when the planning board votes to close the hearing, thereby ending the opportunity for interested parties to present and rebut information. So, I don't know, just throw it out there for thoughts. Is that something that, one, do we need to do that? Because we've always been sort of open to taking in additional information as needed, but there comes a point in time you say, public hearing is closed, no more information can come in, now it's for the board to vote, you know, so.
And I can hear a lot of times, like, we'll say, you know, in favor, that portion public hearing is closed, against, that portion public hearing is closed, then we continue, because then, I speak on this, and I let them speak on it. So technically, it's closed, but you try to still solicit the input from the public.
Yeah, get
So,
as much information.
is it closed, but then you let them speak later?
I think
But that
that's,
was more procedural wise, too.
Yeah, I was
I think you do a good job of getting, you know, letting everybody speak and giving us all the information.
Yeah, I
we need to
mean-
make Reasonable decision.
I mean, from a formal standpoint, I understand, but I think it has served, I think, the residents well in the way we've been able to, you know, the chairman's been able to do that to date. I think, I mean, I can recall project, the old Burbeck's property, and I think part of the residents were upset because, quite frankly, the public hearing was closed and they weren't allowed to comment after hearings that were continued, but the public portion of the hearing was closed, and I know that didn't sit well with residents, and, you know, we're trying to balance
Yeah,
the,
I guess
but
the
it's a good
the
point.
closing should happen just before the vote. And
Just before the
that's it. There's no other information coming
Right,
in.
right.
Right.
But if it's not a legal requirement, I have no objection just leaving things as they are.
Because
I
the
think
part is, like, if you let the applicant come back and speak again, and you shut the other side off,
right.
it's, I'd just say it's not good public policy for the people who want to speak.
Yeah, you
So the guy goes, I get two shots at the board, but I only had one, and now he's changing some things here, but I want to comment about what he just changed, but now I can't.
It's like equal time in an election
You know.
process, you know?
Yeah, I think it makes for a cleaner timeline if there's an actual vote in the process. However, it can be taken just before the motion's made to approve or deny. That way, you don't shut off or cut off any opportunity for the public to participate in the discussion. But it might make sense just as a procedural step. In any case where if there's an appeal, It's certainly by itself, I don't think would jeopardize a decision, but if it's among a couple other smaller concerns in terms of process, it might add up to something that would be concerning from a judge's standpoint. So, maybe taking a vote each time, but, like, as you all said, wait to the very last moment so everybody is ensured the opportunity to speak, even as you all know, the projects evolve during a public hearing process. It might make sense to start doing that.
Yeah, and even to rebut, as Tom said, if the applicant got up and added more information, give everyone an opportunity to rebut or to make another statement.
And the guy could say, okay, now, I heard you say about the parking lot here, so I'm not gonna bother my neighbor to the right, but now I'm gonna put over here and bother my neighbor to my left, but now my neighbor to my left can't speak. And he said, wait a minute,
You
wait a minute.
gotta let them all speak, sure.
Yeah.
So the only procedural question I would say is, if we're gonna vote to close the public hearing, I know sometimes we as members do have questions for the applicant or something else.
Yeah, the closing would happen after all that discussion. I think it
Before we
goes-
all did all that
right,
discussion?
it goes to them, then it comes to us
What's
for
for discussion?
discussion, and then.
Close it and then vote.
Yeah,
Okay.
the closing would be just before the vote.
Because if it came before us, and if we closed it then, and then if one of us had a question, like a lot of times we do, like what Steve was just saying, the guy mentions all these things, these questions, and we ask it back to the applicant,
Right.
Like, instead of having them go face to face at it, so obviously we want that still as part of the public hearing. Okay, so I can say, okay, at this time, I'm gonna turn over to any comments from the boards, then after that, we'll close the public hearing and then vote. Okay,
Yeah.
I have no problem with that.
Just prior to Joe making the official motion.
The instructor actually mentioned that sometimes there's one member of the board that actually keeps the notes and makes the motions, and that's Joe.
There was another interesting point, too, that they talked about the timing of the special permits, when it's approved and when it does lapse, for a variance a year, special permit 2 years, whatever. But one thing I hadn't thought about that was raised in the materials is a multi-phase project where we approve the 2 phases. And obviously, the first phase has to start within the 2 years, but when does the second phase have to start? Is that open-ended forever? That should probably be put in, in our conditions of approval too, that the second phase has to start within 2 years of the completion of the first phase, something like that. Because other than that, you'd have an open-ended project that.
Yeah, right. I think, the first point on that is, as a board, I think you absolutely have an opportunity to, if it's a phased project, first, set up a series of administrative reviews to have the ability to review progress of a project, but 2, to also establish a limit to how long that permit is given, if it's multi-phased. What we've done for projects, particularly special permit, but site plan review as well, if a project was phased or was started and then stopped for whatever reason, and there was nothing going on for 2 years, usually we would start from the stoppage of work or any kind of progress towards completing that project and kind of start the clock from there. What we try to do is reach out to the applicant and let them know, hey, your 2-year period is winding down. You really should, if you want to extend it, you should do it now. Get the seek the
Yeah, they
extension.
may
of the
consider
plan work.
that the work on phase 1 is the start of the whole project, and
Right.
that now we're open-ended as to when we're gonna complete this. And
Right.
that's probably something we should build into the decision as to,
Yeah.
there's gotta be a time frame involved there.
It would make it much easier for enforcement, because it is very challenging to try to identify if there's work stoppage. When exactly did that start? What exactly is, are they no longer exercising their permit?
Now, just from clarification for myself, it would still be the same determination that the building commissioner would determine if in fact the work has begun on, say, phase 2. And then again, that's so open to interpretation, whether they drop some fill on that spot or they put a fence around it, or, I know because I've challenged that in the past. And it's very arbitrary, to be honest with you.
Especially if you have 2 phases, as Joe was saying,
Right.
you just move the dump truck over here,
Oh, yeah,
back it up
no,
and leave it
it's-
there. You say,
it's,
oh, we park it there overnight, so we're working on it.
It's frustrating. It's frustrating
You
from,
know,
if you're
you have
dealing
it,
with
like,
that.
You just move some of the equipment over.
Right, right.
And from again, getting back to the decision and establishing some performance standards in the decision through conditions, I think the board has the ability, definitely through the special permit, and I would say so through the site plan review process as well, to kind of identify some benchmarks.
That would be
For
extremely
implementation.
helpful.
And it-
What we can do is, we can research that a little bit more before I say that's absolutely within the purview of the board, but I'm pretty positive with the special permit that you have the ability to do that.
I think when the first training, they talked about how we can put certain time requirements in on that,
Right. Right.
you know?
So,
I'd just like to,
Into a little bit more.
what defines the,
Yeah.
the timeline of the work commenced on the
And the
phase.
other thing they said at the first training is, we can also fine tune the hour, not just what's on the site, but also the hours of construction on the site. Remember he mentioned that the first time?
Yeah.
That was in the, do you get the handouts from the first time, the first meeting? Yeah. Which were helpful too. You know, he spoke about they have a chance to digest and read some of it, but, because that's, you know, that's always a concern, you know, people say, well, on site here, but what time you get time you gotta start, what time you gotta finish. And I think we dealt with that a little bit, and I know ZBA did with the Lowe's.
Right. Yeah, we can do that, and I think in the building permit process, they're also limited as to hours of construction too, I think.
In the building permit process?
They have
that's
some,
hours of
Yeah, I think
limitation?
Restrictions as to when
Well,
they can
general
operate.
was, and,
during the day?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. I can't think of, I never can remember off the top of my head, but there is, we do have a window that contractors can work.
Right.
Then for weekends, there's a time period they have to actually request the building department whether they can work on a weekend. I think it's a Sunday, but yes, there is. But again, special permits, you have the ability to further restrict that.
I think, generally speaking, you know, when he described all of these things that we are talking about, I think as a board, we cover things pretty well. The one thing that kind of stuck out, and it's being reinforced by what we're talking about now, is he spent quite a bit of time on written decisions, and it's actually got formats in here for special permits, model special permit decision, where you can actually document all these things. I'm wondering if on certain projects, like the Walgreens or the Lowell General, we shouldn't be a little bit more formal about it. So there's a good record of all the information regarding a project. That's really all I saw throughout the whole thing.
This is a handout that Mr. Lockhart is referring to that was handed out at the meeting, so I'll for those that weren't there, I can hand them out right now.
Oh, yeah. I know we have the benefit of Joe Claremont's great lists. But, you know, and we usually cover it through the minutes, but maybe we should be a little bit more formal about it. Only in certain projects, so we're not increasing anybody's workload, you know?
Yeah, that was repeated in these materials, right, in here, because I remember seeing that information in there.
What's this one?
As I went through it, I thought that we did most of everything that they recommended.
Yeah, I did too,
Yeah,
Joe.
and certainly the decisions, if you follow that format,
Exactly the way it was
model
outlined.
special permit decision, you wouldn't miss anything.
Yeah.
One thing I did see is that apparently they want the board or the representative of the board to actually sign the decision, so I think that's not something that we generally do, right? You sign the decisions?
Correct, yeah. with
But
the
I think that
signatory
they're
authority.
looking for a board member or the chair to sign the actual decisions, according to this information. I don't know if we can designate you to do that, or if we actually need Tom to sign the decisions.
Well, we've
Well, we could,
always
we just have to
progressed
take
under
it
the,
vote.
I don't want to say assumption, but under the understanding that by authorizing signatory abilities to, like, there's now 2 staff people that can sign A&R and subdivision, that was, but, you know, that's something that we should actually look into, because I think that language is in subdivision control law, not necessarily 40A, so that would be worth digging into a little bit if it's called out in that. Which, do you mind, which edit was that
in
one?
this writing reasonable and defensible decisions. This is actually
We'll dig into that a little bit.
on page 13.
'Cause I remember in the past when all of the board members would sign the Mylars.
Yeah, the prints.
Yeah,
plans.
you know, be like those clear ones, when you have to use
Right.
the flare to write on them.
Yeah,
Those, I think, might have been more for subdivision,
Yeah, so that's when.
That's what it was the
the
subdivision, I
signatory,
think.
yeah, so
and we'd all sign, remember?
yeah.
we definitely can
Dated.
sign those
Right.
on behalf of the board, but whether or not that translates to
Bring
the
them in,
decisions.
all of
I
us
don't
would
know.
sign it, each board member present.
Right,
Okay.
and we can still do that if
I mean, that,
wishes. but-
I mean, I think sometimes it's, if we have the right to give the signatory authority, it's easier for them to do it sometimes in the office with your presence instead of waiting for a planning board meeting, but
Right.
if we can
Yeah,
check what the criteria is.
Yeah, I agree. Once they're approved, and especially if we see them and we're okay with them, then I would have no issue, you know, authorizing you, Aaron, or someone in the office to sign rather than, you know,
Yeah,
well,
waiting for
doing it
meetings and
all the
call them,
time.
I'll call them to come do them.
I just want to ensure that it's not an actual legal requirement that be
Right.
signed by the chair
Yep.
of the board. I don't recall ever having a decision overturned because the format of the decision was incorrect,
No.
so. And I don't think we've had one really even appealed since you guys have been on, right? You've never been sued on this board, right?
Oh, a few times.
You'd know. It's usually when the constable pulls up, is Tom here? I said, no. Mr. Linehan here? No, who's asking? What do you, I just cut the grass. You know, stuff like that, yeah. They come back. Then they do certified mail, but some will do in hand, but some will do, because I think it's both, Joe, right? You can do certified or in hand by constable?
Right.
Yeah, the requirement's by certified, but,
There's only been a couple, I mean, since
Yeah.
I've been on.
right. And then, a lot of times, they get with, remanded with instructions. Actually, Filter Street was remanded with instructions.
Yeah.
Judge, what's her name, it's just on TV. So, does anybody have any more questions then in regards to the training, issues? And we can keep this as, I mean, with the training sessions, we could, keep these thoughts open, and as we digest them, anybody has any ideas, please come forward with it. I know I couldn't make the last meeting, but I do have the materials, and Aaron was talking about keeping, the recordings of it,
Yep.
and using them for new board members in the future. So I couldn't make the last one, the material, but I wouldn't mind watching the new one. He said you can give the recording, go home and watch it.
Yeah,
And then-
so, right, exactly. What we'll do is we'll include that as part of the package and that new what board members get, and then it's also kind of a library, you know, if you don't get to see it, or you want to take a chance to see it, it's on DVD, you can send it out with a packet and bring it back. And we're also trying to make it available to the public, general public as well. We're seeing about ways that we can link it onto the webpage if people wanted to watch it online that way as well, so.
Because if we carry that thought a little further, I know where the council approved to give us a new board member or slash alternate. Associate slash alternate, I'm not sure how that reading out exactly. Is it gonna be an alternate, associate? It was hyphenated, you know?
I think it's an associate member, I'm not sure.
Said
what
associate slash,
alternate- Yeah, I think it's only in the case, it's for special permits, it's only in the case where there's a board member who's not able to participate or is recusing himself.
so procedure wise, how do we do that? I mean, are we gonna get some rules and guidelines on it, or
Yeah.
do I just pick somebody out of the audience who I like and say, come up here and vote next to me?
No, that would be exciting.
I think they would have to be
Designated.
submitted and approved by the city council, just
yeah,
like any
yeah,
board member would be.
absolutely.
They'd sit as an alternate, and they'd only vote on those matters that either someone is missing or someone had to recuse themselves. And if they started that public hearing, they would have to continue and finish that public hearing even if the missing board member came back. We didn't deal with that because now we have the Mullen Rule and, you know, we're able to deal with it ourselves anyway, but.
So do you have any follow-up on how that's down the line? Do they contact you, do anything about that?
I think the city council approved it,
Yeah,
so,
that's all I know.
the language, at least, the ordinance itself, and, so there would need to be an appointment, and then approval. I think the city council has to approve the appointment as well. But yeah, it's exactly it. If, you know, even if there was 4 members, you could still move forward with a special permit, but if it get down to 3, it's where it becomes critical. And I honestly don't know where the idea for having an associate member for the planning board came from, but I sense that it initiated around the time that the special permit for reduction of frontage came around, that, you know, kind of a concern of a special permit that the board may be seeing on a more frequent basis, to prevent situations where there's not enough not enough board members to actually constitute a quorum, or at least a voting quorum.
I know now if we have 5 people sitting, you need 4 out of 5. If we had 6 on the board, if they've all had a chance to vote, it'd be 4 out of 6.
Maybe you wouldn't have 6 voting, it'd always be 5.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, it's only, and I think there's actual, you can, as the chair, it would, it's okay, X planning board member is not available, you are now appointed to sit and participate in this. There's just kind of it's not they don't really sit there and provide comment unless they're actually sitting in and on the vote.
Because that's what the alternates do with the ZBA. They all
Yeah.
speak, but, and put all their 2 cents in and all their comments and ask questions, then it comes to vote, they don't say anything.
Yeah, that's something that.
They really
I wanna look
participate in the
into.
whole thing, but then they don't vote.
Yeah, that's one of the things out of these meetings that I wanted to look into a little bit, because I'm not exactly sure if, my understanding now, maybe it's different with the planning board, but my understanding is that's not actually how it should be occurring, so.
Yeah, I
That's
don't think they should participate unless they're gonna be voting on the matter.
Right.
So, they're like an alternate juror, sit there and
Right.
shut up unless,
I mean, the alternate,
unless somebody's missing.
for the jury system, you take the alternate, they go sit in the other room, they go deliberation. I mean, they get to sit in during the whole thing, but they don't go in to deliberate, they have to go into a separate room.
Oh,
So we have to put the court officers in separately with the alternate or 2, depending on how many jurors you have, what type of case it is. Sometimes you can have a lot more alternates. And, but they don't even sit in the deliberation at all.
Because if one of the jurors ends up missing after that, they have to start the deliberation all over
Right.
again.
Right.
That's the way we'll do it.
Right. So we have to get that person, we'd have to know ahead of time if someone either had a conflict or wasn't gonna be present to bring that associate slash alternate
Yeah.
on board.
yeah, I should be able to
But that
forward
person would
you
have to
the
be appointed
language.
before we could even bring that person on.
Yeah,
We'd have to
right,
reach out and notify.
right.
Okay.
And my assumption is that they would pretty much have it on their schedule to show up at the meeting, and then I guess find out at the beginning of the meeting, if everybody's
if,
there, nobody needs to recuse
Yeah,
themselves,
I
they
think
can
they
go
sit on
home.
in all the meetings, no matter what, whether
Yeah.
everyone's here or not. They sit in the meetings, they just don't participate unless somebody has to recuse themselves.
Because if you read part of that section, remember Rich and I discussed this too, said that person to be picked by the chairperson. That's what it said in the stuff that we got, but I'm not saying it's accurate that way, but it said that
Oh, in
alternate
the-
would be picked by the chairperson.
In the ordinance amendment?
Yes.
It's in there, because we commented on it. So that's why when we saw it, and I think the 3 of us talked about it, said, how does the chairperson pick who it is, and how does that procedurally work? But if you look at the ordinance, it said the person will be picked by the chairperson. But you can take a look at it again,
I'll look at that, yeah.
because it caught our eye, but, I mean,
Probably makes sense.
so, I mean, that's why we question procedurally wise, how does it work? But,
A couple of other things that came up during the training. One was that there's something in the works for remote attendance at meetings, some kind of a addition to Mass General laws that would allow, and not the Mullen Rule that would allow you to review the tapes and vote, but rather somehow attend the meeting through, Skype or conference call or something like that, which,
Online meeting.
it's not a bad idea, not a bad idea. If in my case, I have a business trip, I have to travel someplace and I still want to attend the meeting, I could do that remotely, which I think would be an asset. So we should keep our eye out for that.
If I remember correctly, I think part of it was addressed in the latest guidance for open meeting law. So honestly, I haven't read through that completely yet, so I'll look through it. And if that's available to the board now, I think it's just a matter of making sure that we have the equipment. We got, the big TVs, just need some way for you to, teleport in.
Teleport in, like Star Trek.
Laptop.
years ago, when
That's probably not
Beam
the-
me up,
Not quite the
Aaron.
right term.
years ago when I was on NEMCOG, we had to use a conference call to have the quorum to vote on a couple of things. We had to reach out, get somebody on the phone, call,
Oh, yeah.
just for the quorum.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
And the other
obviously, it'd be nicer to have it, more participation, but, yeah.
Another thing that I wanted to bring up is he was careful to caution us against passing responsibility to another person or another party in conditions. Like, for instance, you wouldn't want to say, the condition is that you're going to work with the planning board to, finalize the landscape.
Yeah.
That's really not not appropriate. It has to be a little more specific, like maybe you're gonna work with the planning board to pick the trees, the 20 additional trees that you're gonna add to the site, or something like that, rather than just, completely passing it, because really that's our responsibility to vote on one way or another.
And I think sometimes on those, what you could do is, which he mentioned the first time, was if we delegate that, say if we give it to Division of Plan and Development to do it, then they could bring it back into us to look at and have us approve it at a final meeting. Like I say, work with it, and then have them bring it back, and we can pick up on the old business, so we satisfy with that. And what we talked about a little bit is sometimes we get involved with these sometimes we had a couple comments back from one of the city engineers. Well, I thought they said this, I thought they said this, I wasn't sure if it was my responsibility, whose responsibility, and then we started to try to fine tune some of those problems down, because it was getting shifted from the top city engineer to an assistant city engineer, and sometimes they weren't getting signed off on it. And we were told like, oh yeah, they did the work, but it was getting caught in the middle where, now that's been restructured a little better, but
Right.
we saw a few of those slip through the cracks.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're pretty efficient as a board. 9 times out of 10, we vote on a matter the night it comes before us. And it was made clear during the training that we have more time than that. We can't talk to the applicant prior to the meeting. We can't talk to the public about aspects of the meeting prior to the meeting. So the meeting is the time when we get all the information. And it became clear to me that if we feel like we need more time to think about it, or to have a landscape plan drawn up and brought back to us, we should do that.
Yeah.
We should, and we're trying to help the applicants to, hit their schedules and everything, but, our job is to make sure these things, meet our criteria. And if that means, delaying to another meeting, then so be it.
Like you say, refer to work with them and bring it back to us for the final decision, if that meets the criteria to what we hope it was.
Right.
I mean, because we've seen when you tell people to put in certain trees, what are the trees we get? When we go out there and when we've had site visits, really, what are the trees that we approved? Those little things over there,
I mean, every time I drive up Bridge Street and I take a look at that Market Basket lot, I feel good about it, right? Because I think it looks great. And I think it's because we took the extra time to make sure that landscaping plan and the layout and everything was going to be appropriate.
Plus, there's a whole big article on it just recently in the local.
I saw that, yeah.
They did a wonderful job on that.
Okay, so any further comments? If not, we'll move along. Any notices of budding towns, any concerns from any of the parties? If not, we'll entertain a motion to place those on file.
And pardon me, Chairman, there's just one thing I wanted to highlight. I handed out this evening, was a memo from an MCOG, just a draft amendment to the Transportation Improvement Program. So I just wanted to let you know that was handed out tonight for your consideration. Nothing that the board needs to make take any formal vote on, but just for your information.
Accept it and place it on file, would that be sufficient? I'll make the motion that we accept that notice from NEMCOG and place it on file. All in favor, say aye.
So moved.
Motion made and second, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Chair votes yes. Okay. Moving along, we do have some notices from A&R reports. Any questions or concerns on those?
Just a question on the Bernier Street A&R. I just want to make sure that what's happening here then is they're not creating 2 lots, they're just increasing the size of one lot, and then the remaining lot is not going to be a buildable lot, is that, Aaron, am I?
Yeah, I think, correct. There already were 2 lots here. One was an existing non-conforming lot because it was under the 7,000 square feet. In essence, what is happening is the line that is separating those 2 lots is moving over, and it's making the smaller lot larger.
So the lot with the dwelling on it will no longer be non-conforming from the size of the lot?
I think it's still under 10,000 square feet, but it's less non-conforming. There's a driveway. If you were to drive by the property, it's the corner lot in question. The driveway that leads to that building there's about a third of it that prior to the A and R was on both lots.
Oh, okay.
So that property line was moved over to
Clear.
actually bring that driveway all the way into that lot.
Okay, all right. Okay.
And the other lot actually had a building on it as well, but it's well over 10,000 square feet and has the frontage it needed.
All right, thank you.
Any further comments on those? If not, do we have the ZBA notices? Anybody have any comments on the ZBA notices? It looks like there's only 2 new ones, other ones are old business and continuances. Under the new businesses, we have one on Lawrence Street and one on Bridge Street. One's a sign and one's looking for a special permit.
Make a motion to place on file?
Motion made, and
Second.
second, all in favor, say aye. Okay, chair votes yes. Any general correspondence? I think we addressed those. Any further comments from any board members on anything? Mitch, anything you want to update on the historic board? You mentioned this briefly earlier.
No, we have a meeting, I do want to start periodic updates from the historic board. We have a meeting next Monday where some things are going to get updated, and I'd rather have that information before I start that. Our following meeting, I'd like to have a little time on the agenda just
Sure.
to do that.
Just one other thing, we received, open meeting law guide we received tonight. Is this the form that you gave us tonight that we have to sign as well?
Yes, please, if you could just sign it, and you don't necessarily need to give it to me tonight, but if you have it, I'll take it.
Okay, I got it.
What about where it says, okay, oh, okay, I got you, all right. Just sign it, okay, got you. What date did, there's no form here, there. What date would that one?
Yeah, no, on the date, do you want?
The top, and then the
The
beginning.
first date, certify, qualified for the office of planning board on such and such a date, that's the first date, you started on the planning board? Do you remember? Do you remember, Tom, when you started?
7184.
84?
That's good.
Yeah. But you want this morning, today's date on the board, but you do want a starting date up here?
Yeah, the day, if you could, I mean, ask for it.
Sure. I'll give you mine this evening, Aaron, so I won't forget.
Yeah, I have here, one here too.
Okay. Okay. Any further comments? If not, we're going to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion made, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Good night, and thank you all.
That training was good, I enjoyed it.
Yeah.